So, this chapter is going to begin by discussing what ratio and proportion are. And this should be a concept that you probably have done before as early as pre-algebra. And so the very first lesson is just kind of reviewing for us what proportion and ratio look like. And so I'm sure you're familiar with the general form of a proportion. This would be an example of just a general form. A is to B as C is to D. And so we write them as fractions, and typically they're set equal to each other. And in order to know if a proportion is really true or false, something must happen. And what must happen is that their cross products must be congruent or must be equal. So for example, if I were to multiply the number that is here for A with the number that is here for D, A times D has to be equal to whatever B times C is. And so that's where this cross multiply comes in. And this is true of every proportion. Every proportion where there's one fraction set equal to another fraction has this relationship. There has to be cross products equal to each other in order for this to be a true proportion. So on the inside, I'm going to have you write that inside here. So we're going to write here. And here's like a restatement of what's on the outside. A is to B as C is to D. So if that's true, then when I cross multiply A times D, that must be equal to what I get when I multiply B times C. And these these variables, these locations have a relationship. If I were to write A is to B as C is to D, if I were to write it with a colon, it would look like this. A is to B as C is to D. And when I write it like that, the inner variables and the outer variables, those values have names. The inner values, the B and the C, are called the means. And then the outer values, the A and the D, are called the extremes. And I remember that pretty easily because means sounds a little bit like the middle, and extremes, those are on the outer edges, so they're on the extremes. So that's one way that I remember those. And so a couple of things about a ratio or about a proportion that you need to know. And that is that to a certain degree, it does not matter where the values are placed as long as the means are always across from each other and the extremes are always across from each other. So, for example, I could choose to, instead of writing it like this, I could choose to reverse it and write the B over the A. But if I write the B over the A, then I need to make sure that I reverse it on the other side too so it stays consistent and the means and the extremes are always across from each other. So that means that I would need to write it as D over C. And that would be a proportion that is equal to this one. Okay, once again, you're looking for the cross products to not change. You want them to be in the same location. And I could do this another way as well. I could do A over C. So notice I went across this time. Okay. Notice I went from A over here to C. That would be true as long as B is on the top because it needs to be across from the C because those are the means. And then that would need to be over the D. So these are two other ways to set up a proportion that really mean the same thing. Notice though that in both examples, the means are across from each other and the extremes are across from each other. The means are across from each other, the extremes are across from each other. That doesn't change. So you cannot have two different values, the values set up in such a way that the extremes and the means are not diagonal from each other. They have to remain diagonal. And then there's one more example and one more way that we can write an equation that would be equal to this proportion. And that is going to involve us doing a little bit of adding. If I were to add the A plus the B, okay? They're up and down from each other right now. And divide that or write that over the B by itself, that would be a proportion that would be the same as C plus D divided by D. Now you'll notice something on this. So the first thing you'll notice is that I took the A and the B and I added them, and then I divided by the B that's on the bottom. And then over here, I added the C and the D and divided by the value that's on the bottom, which is the D. So these are all equal ways of solving these particular type of proportions or other ways of setting them up. And so we're going to do an example here in just a minute where you get a chance to basically take a proportion and write an equivalent proportion to it using these ideas.